This is a new thing. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Wow. Yeah, I need to start. Maybe that's good enough. Okay, it's not doing the Zoom, huh? Let's give it a shot. Thank you very much for having me today, Vibhuti, colleagues, and everybody else. I was thinking about whether people are born with certain innate attitudes to life that they arrive with, that are given by their genetics, God, nature, nurture, their ancestors. So I'm thinking about a child who arrives with a struggle. He's in grade 8, and he arrives with a struggle of not managing developmentally to deal with the tasks that are set to him as a grade 8. He's just behind the wave. And what's discovered in unfolding his history is that the mom had a very long labor with him. He didn't want to come out easily. And he took a long time to walk and crawl and do all of those things. He breastfed for longer than usual. And if you follow his developmental tracks, normal kid, lovely kid, but he's just struggling in his zone, right to the point where his milk teeth refuse to fall out. The dentist had to actually physically take out his milk teeth because they just wouldn't leave him, right? And so now you've got this whole, you know what I mean? And if I think about him, you know, one of the sort of existential themes that occupies his life is that he is resistant to being alive. This is a human that doesn't want to be here. He wants to be somewhere else. And everything about being alive, about waking up in the morning, about getting dressed, about having to brush his teeth, even eating, he is resistant to it. It's an attitude which might influence him forever. I suppose it takes an effort of will to unpack what are the ingredients inside of him, what is his internal crystal formation that makes him repeat this exercise over and over again. No matter what you say, you've got to get on with it, you have extra lessons, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. His attitude remains the same. It's an interesting thing. So I remember once working in a hospital, and I was very new. And I was like the important psychologist person with a tie and sitting in a circle in a drug unit. And one of the youngsters in the drug unit who was ordered to be in the drug unit by court, so it was go to jail or go to rehab, started telling a story. Now you got to picture it. It's like it's Lentegeur Hospital. It's 1990s. The hospital is brand new. Everything is splinter knit. There isn't a tree in sight. Not a tree in sight, but it's new windows, aluminium, beautiful building. We're sitting in this room, and there must be about 14 inpatients, and I'm sitting with a psychiatric nurse. Lovely woman, interesting woman, who'd been there for many years. She knew her way around psychiatric hospitals, but I was the important guy. I was the psychologist, you know. And then this guy starts telling a story about his life, because the question is, why do you drug? What's going on for you? And he starts telling the story about from when he was little. But within 15 minutes, everybody in the room was crying. We ran out of tissues. We had to go and get toilet paper. The beatings from his father and the sexual abuse and the things that had happened to this guy, everybody. So I'm sitting there feeling like I've got to hold this together. I'm the psychologist, you know, but I've got a lump in my throat and my heart is beating fast because he's telling this tragic story, which no one should endure that. And in the moment when he finishes and he's sobbing and the snot and trane and alles, this psychiatric nurse next to me says to him, "Ich shaan, kak." Now he's shocked. What's going on? And then she says to him in Afrikaans, my Afrikaans is not good enough to be flicks with this, but she says to him in Afrikaans, "This is the third time you've been in this ward in 2 years, and you've told exactly the same bloody story, word for word. I know your tricks and I know your game. If you want to change your behavior, stop making everybody sorry for you and get into what's really going on inside you. What's going on?" And suddenly there was a big change in the mood. It was like a new level of operation over here, kind of going, well, is this a trick that he plays? And it certainly was. He was a highly skilled manipulator, and in fact had learned how to embellish his story. And he could watch people, and he could elicit an emotion from people in the most executive fashion. He was brilliant. And so in the group, and he had like girl stories where the girls would feel sorry for him. He had boy stories where the boys would feel sorry for him, and he could play everybody off against each other in a particular way. Of course, smashing his way through life and failing in different ways and getting into this drug-addicted behavior because he couldn't keep a job, couldn't do anything with himself. Everything was about relieving his tension, relieving his internal anxiety. All his drug taking was anesthetics, ultimately speaking. So I think about that, and then I think about organizational change. I was fascinated with Laurie talking about, you know, like the processes in systems, like knowing this is the procedure, for example, for a maintenance application, and there's a procedure. So you've got to know that form and what's going on. And then this is the idea of like somebody saying, should an organization change? And it's an interesting idea. And then if organizations change, do you have different procedures? Are there different ways of doing things? So I'm thinking about, for example, you know, working in an environment where if you're a schoolboy in a school and you're naughty, the scales of justice have to be balanced in some way. And so, and I've worked in a number of situations where I've said, could we not do this differently and not do this by way of punishment, but kind of get the group itself to respond to itself. So let's have the kids in a panel sitting in adjudication of their peers, and somebody tells a story and thinks about a story based on restorative justice, obviously, and then people are thinking, and then what's the punishment? So you've got a boarding school situation over here, and the punishment is that the child has to serve his table. He has to go and fetch their breakfast for a week and make good. He's cleaning up his mess, as it were. And then what I introduced is when he's finished that evening in the boarding house, there's a little bit of a ceremony. And what happens is the headmaster of the boarding house announces, so-and-so has completed his punishment, as was determined by the court of his peers, and the story is washed clean. He starts again. And the boy can stand up, and the group announce, it's finished now, it's forgotten, never to be mentioned again, unless it happens again. And then they tackle it. And there's something about like a revival of that boy's capacity to rejoin the group, as opposed to getting beaten up by the group in some way. Because you've got these things going on around, how do we do that for each other? And how do we train mediators to go, don't just think about the process of how you mediate, you know what I mean? So anybody who knows, I know there are a lot of social workers in the room, so here's the fail. This is how somebody fails, is you've got an anxious client in your office, you're talking and you're having a conversation, and you want to communicate your capacity as a mental health professional. And so you lean forward and you say to the person, how are you feeling? It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. You're doing all the right things. Your tone of voice is right, you're making eye contact, you're leaning forward to show that you're engaged, everything is right, but it is going to come across as fake, right? Anybody listening to this is going to kind of, that's creepy. That person is not talking properly. So somehow in terms of our change, whatever we learn, and it's not that difficult to learn, something has to happen internally. If we don't change internally and our fundamental attitude towards what you are doing changes, you don't change. You know more. And that's where we know that knowledge is not wisdom. There's a difference between the two. So some people know a great deal about things, but in the room, when they're working in a mediation context, they're not creating the optimal conditions for people to operate. Okay, so what you want to be sure of is they don't get captured. That's a nice word to use in this context. You don't get captured by what you already know, that you're fleet of foot, you're innovative, you're ahead of the game, and there's foresight, what's to come next, and that's the key thing. When I worked a little bit with, an overseas university, it was actually a collaboration between two of them. One of the tasks was to predict what kind of Audi people would want to buy in 10 years. Right? So now we had to figure out, and what we used was science fiction. And we went to kids, and we kind of went, the average owner of an Audi in that country is 27 years old, and suddenly we went to people who are 16 or 17. And we got the imagination of what they would like in a car. So if you look at digital layouts in cars, all of that stuff that Audi invented, like it's an actual digital console in your car, it's not proper dials, electric doors and windows, automatic locking. When you come up to your car automatically opens. Those were all technologies that were thought up by 17, 18-year-olds who kind of go, when I'm big and I have a car, this is what I want in my car. And that led the invention and the technology and the research and development into those technologies were led in that particular way. So I suppose if you're a mediator, you want to have some foresight about what's to come next. What outcome do you want, and what possible outcomes are available to you? Okay, so I'm looking at some elements of mediation training, and I'm thinking, for any mediator, you have to find out what's going on. And that can take a little bit of time. You can't assume that the problem is the problem. So sometimes even in maintenance issues, which I'm learning more and more about being in this group, maintenance issues very often are not about money. It's not the issue, actually. There's another psychological phenomena driving. So you've got to kind of get what it's about. And sometimes it jumps up to grandparents and uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters, which are all implicated in why it's difficult to support a child in a particular way, especially if the child's not living with you. All right, because I think men are more defaulters, in a sense, than women, right? So you have to figure out what's going on, and then you have to figure out why. What conditions persist inside a person that they would need to be pursued by the law to pay for their child to live and to go on? I mean, wouldn't a guy automatically say, yeah, there's school fees and things. How do you leave your child and your ex-wife to cope, knowing she's got a very fixed salary and you're not even contributing to your child's well-being? It's an interesting phenomenon, but what's going on inside the person and why? And then you have to figure out what's the pathway for change. Is there a possibility in the situation, and what are the doors and windows that you need to walk people through Sometimes in mediations, the shortest distance between A and B is not a straight line. You've got to go there, and you've got to go there, and you've got to go there, and sometimes circle back, and sometimes repeat things. And that's an essential ingredient that if you're rushing towards a solution, especially when we're under pressure, time pressure, you know what I mean? If you look at the National Health Service in the UK, the GP has got 15 minutes to assess, diagnose, and treat. He's got 15 minutes per patient. That's his job. All right, if he goes to a double session, has implications for the National Health Service about what they pay for and don't pay for. And if he can't diagnose and do that in that space of 30 minutes, he's got to bump them into another section because now it's more complicated. All right, can we do that in mediation? Should we do that in mediation? Or should we develop increasing skills and know the context in which we're living? So there's a relationship with leadership development and mediation. Leadership development and ADR, conflict resolution skills. And we should always keep in mind that in a way, as the mediator, you are leading a process. You are the person who's kind of edging into going into the future with these people and finding that place where somebody goes, okay, that could be possible. I'll consider it. It is a possibility. And start a process where people come together and agree with something, okay? Obviously, sorry about my slides are funnily numbered because I took them from a different presentation, but obviously everybody's got to have like a set of core competencies. What are you good at? What are you not good at? What are your vulnerabilities? And what do you need to look at when you're a mediator? Kind of, I need to tidy that up, fix that, make sure that I build that part of myself. And then you've got assumptions that you make about what mediation even is, what you are doing in the room with these people, because you certainly, if your assumption is that you're a hero, and you're fixing people's problems, you're going to run into some of your own. It's an assumption that people make. You know what I mean? If you make an assumption in mediation that you know better, you will communicate that, and people will feel embarrassed and shamed and challenged by you in some way. They'll feel downplayed or underplayed, and you're going to get a secondary resistance to something else. And then everybody's got a personality style. Everybody's got their own way of rolling, their own way of functioning. Of course, this is where you want to start unpacking. And this is this is from a technology called the Leadership Circle, which was designed to evaluate every aspect of your functioning as a leader, as a mediator, wherever you're working with other people. So it's too complex to go into, but that's what I'm looking at, these three things of what competencies do you have, what assumptions do you make, and what style of personality do you have. And you can see it gets very granular because you can look at your leadership capacities in the positive, and on the other side of that, you can look at things in the negative. That's like the chart. And you're looking at the top end, the north end, you're looking at creativity. At the bottom end, you're looking at your reactivity. Like something pulls you into responding to a person in a cross or angry way, which straight away is like a fail. You have to start again, reboot, and get that right. You don't want to be self-correcting too many times during the course of a mediation where you've blown something, or you've got people off the path. And then, of course, to the left and right, you need to look at the relationship that you're having with your clients in relation to the eastern side, which is the task. What task are you actually doing at the moment, right? Now, you've got to have a movement between those things. It's an energetic thing around how you do the one versus you doing the other. On top of that, you can look at all the top end, or all creative competencies, and you can look at the chart. You can download it, but you can read, what it says. I'm not going to go into it now because it's very detailed, and you can look at what is your reactive style. All right, we don't have anything to write on, on the board. We don't have we don't have that flip chart. Okay, and then if I look at skills, competencies, and talents that you have, at any one time when you're working with humans, in any context really, you're holding multiple realities at once. There's several things going on simultaneously, and you've got to have the kind of mind that can sort of patrol each channel and get feedback from each channel and loop that back into the room as you're working. So one of the first thing is the capacity to understand the reality of all parties from their perspective. Easier said than done. Easier said than done. So sometimes you've got to think, sometimes you've got to explore, sometimes you've got to discuss, sometimes you've got to go back to somebody's reality. For example, it's the parent who kind of goes, I don't care, my child will go to university and whatever happens, and the push is for the kid to do well at school and go to varsity, which is a good thing, right? I mean, you'd expect that's a good thing. But the reason it's failing is because the father's agenda isn't simply to make sure that his son goes to university. It's that the father never got to go to university. And what he's doing is basically reenacting his own disappointment through his child. And the child is picking up quite unconsciously a resentment and an anger that he's being made to do something which he doesn't own, doesn't belong to him. So the kid's not going, yes, I want to go to varsity. The kid's going, I'm being forced to live somebody else's life. And that creates a problem, in a way. So one wants to be sensitive to people's realities and why they're there in the first place. Once you've understood something, like if one finds a way to say to this particular father, what was it like for you? Because you told the story of not being able to go to university yourself. That's number two. That's being able to reflect back to the participants, their realities, and anybody else's reality. Because sometimes you might have to help a couple reflect on each other's reality and get in touch with each other. And then, of course, you want to help the parties develop a new way of thinking, a new lens with which to perceive the world, which is now solution-making. It's a new day now, and you're not just going to repeat your old mistakes again and again and again. Obviously, like the skills that you need for that, because those are like the realities that you're facing, but there are things like active listening. And then, I'm wondering whether people know what active listening is. And how that, so active listening isn't, we were talking about this at tea, active listening isn't looking carefully at the person and making eye contact and nodding furiously. There's an exchange that takes place between humans when humans are felt. So think about you out for tea with people, or you at a swimming pool and your kids are swimming, and your kid is on the side of the pool and goes, "Mommy, mommy, look," and jumps in the pool. If the kid comes up and looks at the mother and she's looked away, he's got to do the whole damn thing again. And they go, "Mommy, mommy, look." If she looks and when he comes up, she smiles at him and reflects to him, "Well done, you're a good diver and jumper," whatever it is, then he's satisfied and he carries on playing for a while. So that's a form of active listening, where she's communicated his need is met in that moment. It's not simply that she nodded, "Oh, you jumped into the pool, I'm seeing you." So he feels something internally. He feels a sense of being praised or being looked at or being acknowledged, being affirmed in some way. And that's her active listening of a child in a particular way. So we can go through then, that's all done through body language. All the practical skills that you'd learn in any mediation training is what you do with yourself, what you do with your voice, what you do with your language. But the premise that I'm making is that you're holding these realities. So it's not an exercise in behavior. It's an exercise in being. And that's the key thing about mediation training. Any human relationship dynamic that you're dealing with, that's the key to it. I'll go into a car shop, looking at cars because I like cars. And one of the things that the salesman says to me, because he sees me looking at a particular car, and he's very sensitive. So now he's gauged me and he sussed me out, and he's kind of going, that the dude's looking at that particular car. And then he says to me, "Are you looking at that whatever it is?" And he says, "I've got to tell you something. If I had the money, that's the car I would buy." It's like such a sleazy trick that he's playing. You know what I mean? It's like, but he learned that, you see, like when he did his training, he learned that, that if he's a good salesman, the customer is going to kind of go, "Well, he's the expert in cars. Shit, that's a car that I want to have because it's desirable to the guy who knows about cars." Okay, that's how that stuff works. So, situations. Some situations are unbelievably vexing. We don't know where they came from. We don't know how they started. We don't know what they are. We have to unpack what the hell happened in the situation. And it could be the history of the parties, it could be finances, it could be affairs, it could be family violence, you don't know. But you've got to start exploring what went down over here. And now, in terms of mediation that's being required, here is a very complex situation. Somehow, if you were the mediator, you'd have to figure out how you're going to even start this particular conversation with these people. I hope that didn't work. I don't know what to do with that. Yeah.
Maybe have a link?
I do.
If you can send it to me on WhatsApp and I'll forward it to you.
It's a very short It's there. Can we just plug that in there? Or is it going to mess the whole thing up? Wow, that's good. Can you make sound? Okay, that's good. Okay, see if we can go again. So I don't, you can't hear it because I thought it would come up. Did you hear him go? Did you hear he laughed? That's going to be the biggest issue in that mediation. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, now how do I go ahead on this thing? Okay, fine. Okay, so you can see now that's going to be a tough mediation. You know, so we're going to go. He's a kid. He's naughty. He did his thing. But what she's going to be most offended about is he's giggling when he ran down the stairs. He was delighted at his action, right? And wasn't her response just fantastic? She could not believe in her life that this was even taking place. You know, so that's definitely a complex mediation that you might face yourself faced with in some way. You know, other than all the other notorious issues that surround mediation issues when children are involved. And the emotional pull between parents about who possesses the child, whose love counts, who the child is more important to, those dynamics emerge, and you need to be hugely alert to what's going on in the room and to be very careful about not prejudging and making rapid suggestions because you might be deeply offending somebody who themselves suffers from attachment difficulties or from betrayal issues or from some other dynamic which makes their possessing their child absolutely important and vital to them. We just got to be sure about that. So the point that I'm making is the definition of conflict at the top. It's an organized representation where you've got a grasp on the whole picture. You know what's going on, and you know as much as possible about the parent's history, about who's in the room, who's doing what and why. And then the structure of the conflict is composed of these images, these narratives, which you are now managing and floating around. For yourself, the dynamics are, to what extent do you feel you have integrity versus incompleteness? That means, do you feel like a whole person? Do you feel like one person where all your experiences and your life wisdom and your knowledge is one thing, or do you feel split off? Do you, so do you need to look at yourself? You know what I mean? So it's like I have this meeting early in the 2000s, and it's a meeting of a group of headmasters. These are headmasters of relevant schools, and the headmasters are sitting and the guy's actually saying to me, we're sitting at dinner at a restaurant, and the guy's saying to me, the trouble is they're going to ban corporal punishment. They're going to stop us from hitting kids. Now the guy's sitting at dinner, and he's going there, they're going to stop us from hitting kids. And he's gesturing, you know what I mean? Because he's having this experience of how's he going to keep discipline in his school without being able to hit somebody on the bum with a stick. So now he's possessed of something. So and now if you say to him, dude, what is the story about? You have a thing going on with hitting kids. What's the story? Now he'll talk about discipline and the need for discipline in school. Now he's split off from his own sadism. He's split off from his own need to control people. He's split off with his own spitefulness. He's split off from his own abuse, probably as a child. You know what I mean? And now he's just projecting that into the future and projecting that somewhere else. So that's the difference between somebody who can take it on to kind of go, the reason I'm passionate about this has to do with me, not the situation, versus somebody who's incomplete, who's going to cut it off and not see the bigger picture. And then you've got to get this idea about interconnectedness and autonomy. And it's an interesting thing, especially for men, because it's like men don't ask directions, it's that kind of thing, because you want to be autonomous, you don't want to ask for help. But to what extent do you really think that you belong to a community, and that every single person, you're watching every single person, and how every single person can contribute to the greater whole? Or you kind of go, it's just about me, it's about what I do next. And that's a sad state of affairs when you're operating like that. And there's something about being static and dynamic, being static implying that you know how it works, and no one's going to tell you that it works differently. You've got your way, you've done it for many years, and there's nothing new which can enter the scenario, Dion, what's the section 41A1 from the Maintenance Act which allows the child maintenance officer to investigate the well-being of the child? Section 10.1. So I learned about Section 10.1A on Friday. All right, well, it blew my mind from Dion. I was talking to him and going, well, man, that is such an unbelievable opportunity to take a load off the magistrate's court, to take a load of the family advocate's office, take a load of social workers. Right in the Maintenance Act, you guys have to learn, if you're a maintenance officer, you have to learn something about how to mediate those complex difficulties, because it really does give so much power to the maintenance officer to solve a difficulty very early on in the chain of family collapse. Very exciting, I've been reading about it. I'm sorry I forgot the name of because you guys do that section 10, and you go the numbers, right? Yeah, I say things like personality disorder. And then you've got typicality versus are you somebody who kind of goes, I want to be typical, and I just want to be regular, I want to fit in with everybody else, and I want to look too different, I don't want to, I need to look the same, and I want to stand out, versus somebody who kind of goes, as an individual, if I've seen the situation, I know the situation, I'm prepared to stand up and say, no, I think it's green. I think it's green, And there are lots of experiments in psychology where, you're in a room and then people are talking about the blue wall. And everybody's going, they're raving about the blue wall. You know what I mean? The color, and they're discussing the color. It's a kind of turquoise thing. And they kind of get this one guy talking about what kind of blue do you think it is? And he's going, it's like aquamarine. The wall, by the way, is green. And he's going to go, no, it's aquamarine. But everybody, it's a complete setup. Everybody in the room is pretending that the wall is blue. All right? And then which individual in that group kind of goes, guys, that's green. And then, and percentage-wise, like a significant portion of university students, and these are second and third years, will agree that the wall is blue because they're so influenced by the power of the group saying, that's what it is. Okay, and then some things about change. I'm not going to go on for long now. Some things about change. And then transformation, and there is something about transformational mediation, which we can talk about another time. Transformation sometimes happens when we are at the edge of our capacity to manage. And we kind of feel exhausted and we feel something has to be different. Sometimes there's a psychological respite where somebody stops and goes, I might have to do this differently. So no matter how despairing these situations are, as far as I'm concerned, which is the philosophical attitude, is that all human dilemmas can be solved. They might not be solved perfectly, but they can be solved. And we need to have an attitude of incredible hopefulness with human beings, that even if it seems very despairing, we can find the bits that give that family some direction to go forward into the future. And then lesson number 2 from mediation is that any transformation is an exchange between two people. So you're sitting in, it's actually, as the mediator, there's an exchange with you as well. But you're looking at somebody giving and taking in a way that's essential for mediation to take place, because in most mediations, not everybody gets everything they want. They get most of what they want, yeah? And then transformation does require courage, and the courage is to live in a way that you haven't resolved the problem for a period of time. You have to be able to tolerate no man's land. It's the fundamental difference between psychiatry and psychology, by the way. Psychiatry can only deal with what it knows. Classical psychiatry. If a psychiatrist doesn't know what's going on, he can't look at his bag and say, take the blue ones, all right, because he knows now that you're depressed. He'll be paralyzed. But psychology is designed to cut away from the shore, to go into uncharted waters and to discover the new. And that's what you want to do for your clients. You want to discover a new capacity, not just a repeat of the old capacity to manage. I'm not going to go into this, but this is just like an authenticity thing, from business people and academics around the world, actually. And people were asked, what do you think authenticity is? And it's so fascinating from different countries what crystallized into how people see, like, is it having a purpose? That's the first one. That's like a German thing, to somebody kind of going, in a sense, being ethical, finding your path, which has to do with the soul and how the soul moves. I suppose you need to decide for yourself on what authenticity means. Can you be, with your knowledge, with your experience, with the role that you're playing, can you be as authentic a human being as is possible? Authentic obviously isn't discussing your personal life with your clients, that's what I mean, but it's being real. Can you be real? Sometimes being real is having a reaction to things. Sometimes being real is going, I can't do anything about this. That's the reality of the situation. If I encounter, a 12-year-old child whose father was shot to death at a petrol station somewhere on the way home, and the pictures that he saw were the hamburger that he was buying for his kid is lying next to the dead body, and I'm sitting in a room listening to that child's grief, I cannot but be grief-stricken with him. It's impossible for me. I would be some kind of, psychopath, sociopath, to not empathetically feel somebody else's pain at that level. And I think one has to allow one's authenticity in that way. Sometimes things are shocking and things are painful. There's a thing about the leadership cycle, leadership circle, and then again, they're quadrants, and you can just look at it and you can say to yourself, in terms of number one, where are you psychologically? Where are you spiritually, if you buy that? Where are you cognitively? How do you think? Are you aware? Are you awake? Are you researching? Are you hungry? And then how do you translate that number two into skills? Which is all behavioral stuff. It's like how you say, if I believe that and that is true philosophically and psychologically, how do I translate that into behavior with other human beings? And then, of course, you need to be aware of like what culture does, what situation and culture is, because different people do think of things differently and do understand life and living differently. People's relationship with money, people's relationship with food, people's relationship with dress, people's relationship with their body. They are all different in different ways, for different people. And then finally, you look at the organizational design. What's the nature of this family? What's the nature of this organization? How are they put together? What are the variables that make up the currency, the psychological, emotional currency in this particular organization, which can be a family? Okay, I'm gonna not do that because it's just too detailed. All right, and I'm just wanting to say, because I want to go back to parenting plans and maintenance issues, you know what I mean? So the story around parenting plans is that you're supposed to have a parenting plan, and you could be the person who's helping people design a parenting plan. So whatever I've said so far goes into that idea that you're sitting with people who might be peaceful, actually, they might not even be fighting, they just need a parenting plan. But to be aware that a parenting plan is not a mechanistic thing. That parenting plan can have an impact on that, how that family functions for years to come. You know what I mean? And then sometimes people can't afford to go back to court to change the terms of a parenting plan if it's a high court order. It becomes quite difficult, Anecdotally, I think that in my work, probably 85% of parenting plans, the parents have changed the terms informally within the first year. So Wednesday night has become a Tuesday night or whatever, and they've just kind of got, it works easier for us, that's how they work. But I just want you to be conscious, of what I've written in bold, is how you think about the family. It's not, you've got a pro forma parenting plan, you just stick the terms in there. Something might be about, I've just, it's a sub judice at the moment, but the issue would be, is the father lives overseas, and what is being offered is if he comes to South Africa, he can have half the school holidays. Sounds fair, half the school holidays. But the truth is that if he has half the school holidays, if you count up the school holidays, he has 31.5 days with his child per year. That's all it is. If you can only come in the holidays for half the holidays, I don't know that you can sustain a human relationship in 31 days a year. And then people kind of go Skype and, Zoom and whatever it is, And then as a wise child said to me is, I can't hug my dad over Zoom, so that's another reality. Okay, so mediation takes place when the subject, other relationship, and it's different from an ordinary social relationship because you have a job to do. And it's worth remembering that you have a job to do. Your job is to think bigger, to think at the long term, to look at the child's life and go, are you going to be responsible as much as you can look into the future, which might not be further than, 2 years or, whatever it is, but nevertheless. And to just be aware that you are a player in that circle. You are a co-creator of that family's life in some way, for some years to come, and it's worth taking on that responsibility. Just some ideas from business. So one is ZOPA, which is the zone of possible agreements, is when you're talking to people, you've got to find this lens where instead of it being completely polarized into two separate things which don't touch, you've got to try and bring them together to find some overlap. What is the zone of possible agreement between these people in some way? You know what I mean? So if you kind of go, if somebody says 100 and somebody says 120, that's very different from somebody saying 10 and somebody saying 500. You're close now, and you can just draw that closer so that you can overlap. It's just a way of thinking about operating in a mediated space, And then there's, of course, what's called the positive bargaining zone, where the two parties are emotionally and psychologically in the mood to settle. I want this done. I would like this thing to be done now. In other words, some of the exhaustion and traveling the distance, the person has gone, I've knocked on that door, I've knocked on that door. I'm satisfied. I'm not going to get luck in those ways. My bargaining, emotional bargaining has ended, and now I'm looking realistically at what is possible and what is going to go on. There, of course, is a negative bargaining zone, where somebody's sitting in a mediation and their arms are folded and they're looking away in silence. And then you kind of, well, maybe you have to stop the meeting or, find a way to have a cup of tea or do whatever it takes. And the last idea from business negotiation is BATNA, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Now, obviously, in these agreements, what you, ideally speaking, is you want both parties to go, I'm happy. All right? When I assess matters and I do reports, what I'm hoping is I've sent my report to the attorneys separately. The attorneys have sent my report to the individual clients, and somebody is sitting at home going, that's exactly what I wanted. And somebody else is sitting at home going, that's exactly what I wanted. That's the idea, you know what I mean? That you've processed their thinking about the outcome enough for them to go, that's my target, and I've agreed with the target. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Like 20 more minutes. I'm joking.
I can go. I promise you, I can go. I'm definitely going because there's so much, I was just thinking about So I wondered what people thought about the idea of going, there's practical knowledge which you need to acquire, stuff that you need to do in any kind of mediation, and the idea of that working on yourself is an issue as well. Yes.
Thank you so much, Bernard, for a very informative session. There's a big need in mediation for the other side, the softer skills. Lawyers think they have it all.
Yes.
And a lot of mediation is done with a lawyering mind. But mediation is not built on the law. Mediation is built on economics, psychology, and awareness. What we need more about is the psychology and the awareness part. So yes, as a mediation community, we would love to hear more about that from you, if you're willing to bring that to the table.
Thanks, Laurie. I think it's the only thing that I really do well.
Absolutely.
Is get people to internally grow. So yeah, absolutely.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other thoughts or questions? Go ahead.
This Blue Water
Well, some people, like a guy who goes, they both live in Cape Town, and the guy goes, I want half the school holidays with my child. And he feels psychologically and emotionally entitled. On the face of it, why not? But he only gets 28 days leave a year. So then I say to him, what are you going to do with the other days? You know, you've got like a week and a half left where you don't have time. He says, I'll put the kids in aftercare. So his blue water is, it's my right to have my children for half the holidays. Even if it means putting them in aftercare, and so the kids can't go to their mother who is available to have the kids in that time, you know what I mean? So that would be like his psychological makeup is making him go to what seems to be an obvious and correct answer. Yes, why shouldn't you have half the school holidays? Certainly if he was available and had the time, one would kind of go, that's the right answer, you know, that's the right solution for the kids. So people think in particular ways, and to get them to think clearly, accurately, openly, all the words that I could make up around somebody getting the bigger picture is a job. It's a subtask of mediation, coaching, executive growth for anybody to see the whole picture, including us.
In an ideal world, being a mediator yourself, obviously your background is a psychologist, whereas a lot of mediators does not have any background in psychology. This is only my opinion, but in my opinion, say the 40 hours spent on gaining your, at this stage, it will probably change in the future, but for the practical training, the theoretical training to become a mediator, thereafter you obviously have your practical sessions. I think it should actually become almost mandatory to include some psychology into the training. And it's going to be so difficult because no one will become a psychologist, obviously, in 40 hours or 1 week or 2 weeks or even 52 weeks. What, in an ideal world, what do you think? If they can be like, calling it a short course, let's call it that, but what would you think? How much time, like, would you think?
Okay, no, how long is a piece of string? But I can respond. So I remember when I went for my interviews to do masters, there were a lot of people there, and it was 5 days. They had us in there for 5 days. So you were interviewed individually by every single staff member. That's like 16, 17 interviews, or the senior staff. They're watching in a group behind a one-way mirror. They've got you doing exercises. They've got you talking to their senior students who are pretending to have some kind of disorder and see how you're handling it, you know? And then I remember sitting in ward rounds. Now, it's old school ward rounds, right? So you're sitting in a room that's probably 1.5 times the size of this room. All the psychiatrists and senior psychologists are in a circle, and you're presenting a case. I kid you not, when I was presenting in ward rounds, I would take a spare shirt to work and keep it in the boot of my car because I would sweat with anxiety. Sweat, like I've just been at gym. You know what I mean? And they would ask you questions. Why are you saying that? What are you saying that? What are you saying that? You know what I mean? You're kind of there thinking, I think it starts with an F, something you. You're thinking that, you know what I mean? Because you are so, you know what I mean? And they're pounding you. And then the guy who's in charge of you has got a black book on the side, and he says, at the next ward round, I want you to present on dissociative anxiety disorder and postpartum psychosis. That's an academic piece. And I promise you, at the next ward round, he opens his book and he goes, Altman, you're supposed to be talking on that. You've got 15 minutes and 20 minutes. And then, of course, you work in wards. You're actually working. You're a working psychologist in a ward. And so you're being watched and you're being looked at and being seen. So that takes years to shape and hone, not just that you have the experience, but at shaping and honing who you are. With, I think, people who nurture you. I'm forever grateful. So some of the teachers that I really didn't like, who gave me a hard time back then, I'm forever grateful for them, you know, just teaching me the psychiatry and the rudimentary so I could forget it, that it always comes up when it needs to. It's always in the background when it needs to, but it allows me to be a human. So what happens if you have like a 40-hour mediation course, which are the basics, and it's called something indicating you've got a white belt, you know just enough to not mess it up, hopefully. Should we kind of go, you've got to have supervision. You know, you just got to have supervision. Some of your cases you've got to take to a person who is an expert, and you've got to play it through. So somebody's pointing out to you, maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other, so that you're learning. And then should we have a second course which tilts itself towards your own growth and development, who you are in the situation? Because then you know that's mediation, you define the context, you've got all that stuff under your belt, you know how it works, you know how to talk to people, you know how to be professional, fill in the forms, do the thing, keep on time, you've got all that stuff going on. Now let's focus on you, because you are the only instrument. You're not like a carpenter, like if you break your saw, you just get a new one. You are your only instrument, and that needs to be honed, and that needs to be taken care of. So I kind of go, you need to be in some kind of mediation group where people are presenting their work, so you can think about other people doing their work. It's a training exercise. Should it end? When should it end? How long? At what point do we go, no, I'm a sole practitioner and I'm on my own, I don't talk to anybody about anything, you know? I've been working for 30 years, I still have supervision. I'll make sure that I talk. So I'm an oldie, so there are not a lot of guys in Cape Town, you know what I mean? But I've got people that I know, you know, who's experienced as me. And when I get like a vexing situation, I want to go and sit and have a cup of coffee and kind of, you know what? I don't understand what's going on over here. Can I talk it through? And somebody reflects back to me. Because we're all blind in one way or another. And it takes an incredible arrogance to imagine that you can capture somebody else's scenario. You know what I mean? People are complex, people are hidden, people are deep. So what happens if mediation stops being, you know, like a thing that somebody does in the background somewhere, and it's not taken that seriously, but it's given the credit that it deserves? You know, it would be like a counselor. I mean, I think in this country, there are not actually that many psychologists. So a counselor should take on more of the load. You know what I mean? Because people come to see me, you actually don't need a clinical psychologist, they need a counselor. Who do I find for them? And so counseling as a service is increasing in its social value, and I think so should mediation. So I can't give you a timeline, but I would certainly say I'm an advocate for mediation too. And as I said in this forum before, I'm also an advocate for mediation being a high school subject. Yeah, that there should be a textbook and kids can go, I can choose mediation, alternative and conflict dispute resolution methodology as a subject, you know, for matric. And then we'll change the world.
Because the thing is, you'll be biased in some other way.
Yes.
And it's only when you understand yourself better, you can be more objective.
Yes,
But
exactly.
there is obviously your own personality, your own background. If you are not a healed person, there is definitely some factors that
Always influences. It always influences, yeah. Good. Anybody else thinking anything?
I'm just wanting you to commit to 10 months next year with us. Sorry.
Bernard, where did you train as a mediator?
I trained at FAMAC.
At FAMAC, okay.
But I started mediating and conflict dispute resolution before I even heard of FAMAC. It's what I was doing because I understood there was a need for that.
Yeah.
I just didn't call it mediation at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I was also trained by them, my first mediation course, but the training was very limited.
It still is. It still is.
I had something like 14 pages after my training. Today we have manuals covering about 300 pages, just for one of the topics. But I'm convinced that there's a need that goes beyond what we're getting at the moment in terms of the psychology part, the so-called 12 hours psychology for mediator training. Because all of that is focused on the subject of writing the parenting plan, and here and there touching on the parties are separating, they're going through a divorce. All of that is related to the case that
Yeah, in my head, I've got like, you know, you've got to understand people's defense structures and what defense mechanisms are. You've got to have some developmental theory under your belt. You've got to have some attachment theory under your belt.
Yeah.
You need to understand something about personality and personality structure and so on, you know. So in my head, I've got a clear picture. And in my last talk that I did, yeah, I think I addressed the specifics more of what people actually need, you know, to be a mediator. But there's no doubt we can put something together.
Yeah, I would like to take that to NAPFAM. We've got the chairperson is Henkie de Jong. She likes to do a lot of things, do a lot of development. So we can even arrange a session where you can present on why it is necessary. And I'm convinced it's necessary.
Yeah. Look, my experience of training younger psychologists has proven to me that once somebody's at a particular level of intellectual inquiry, they're stimulus hungry, they will acquire the information. You can just read this, read that, read that.
Yeah.
And then the content of the training is more about personal growth and development.
Yeah.
And then to kind of look at your client system. So I can assume things about somebody who's at least got a master's degree in psychology about how they're understanding things. If you look at a mediation course, what is the person's exposure to training and learning and who are they? And then you can design it around somebody who might not be an academic person purely. They might be clever, they might be smart, and so that needs to be designed around that. But I think absolutely, you know. I'm just about to go on holiday, so I'm not going to commit myself to anything right now.
Our next meeting is on the 29th of January.
Right.
If we can maybe correspond before then, I would appreciate that.
All right. So can I say, I'm not going to promise, because I don't know where I'm going to be, you know, at that time. But I'll liaise with Natalie, and we can kind of pull that together, because I know Natalie. And we can pull that together, you know. And do I have your address and all of that stuff? Can we exchange?
Yes, please.
Yes, you know what I mean. But I'm very keen, you know, to be involved in a training. That's a passion of mine. Yeah. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, good day. My name is Liesel Cronje. I've got a question here that was posted on a high court group for mothers who are really struggling at this stage. I don't know if this question was asked in the group, it was asked today, but they said, I think someone must ask Laurie and Mr. Altman about the FAMAC process and how they deal with PC complaints, as well as the implementation and monitoring of the PC guidelines.
Just if I can just quickly jump in before you, Laurie, on the FAMAC website, there's a whole section of if you have a complaint about a FAMAC mediator, the steps are outlined, A, B, C, as clear as a bell, you know, on their website. So all you need to do is log onto the FAMAC website. You can see if you have a complaint, this is what you need to do. And there is an ethics committee, and there are people available to kind of go, if there's a complaint, she's going to have to put it in writing and explain the situation. Laurie, I don't know if you have more to add?
Yeah. So every NAPFAM organization, if you can just repeat it so they can hear it. Unless you want me to go.
Yeah, come up, Laurie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind standing next to you. You're nice.
Two giants.
Every NAPFAM member organization, including SAM, FAMAC, Social Justice, KZN Association of Mediators, have processes to deal with complaints. So a PC, a parenting coordinator, is a trained mediator who has done additional training to become a PC. But they're all members of these organizations, and the same procedures are followed. Yeah.
Can I just ask briefly, if you don't mind, can you in 1 minute just explain what a parental coordinator, what's the main, why do you have a parental coordinator and not just a normal mediator?
Okay. Yeah. So the question is about what's the difference between a mediator, a family mediator, and a parenting coordinator. The main difference is in the following. In mediation, the outcome is in the hands of the parties. They decide what the outcome of the mediation process is going to be. With parental or parenting coordination, there's someone else who's going to make that final decision because the parties cannot agree. It's all about parental responsibilities and rights. PCs cannot make decisions about maintenance, for instance. They cannot make decisions about relocation, and so on. It's, they mainly make decisions about contact and care, assisting the parties. If the parties cannot make come to a decision, the parenting coordinator will make that decision for them. And that will be binding because there's either a contract signed, which gives the PC the authority, or there's a court order that authorizes the PC to make those decisions. But it can be reviewed by a court of law later on. But up until then, it's binding on the parties.
Yeah, so we should probably recognize that not all provinces support parent plan coordination. In Natal, for example, you're kidding, you know, what are you guys doing? I think the Western Cape and Gauteng are quite in favor of it. As Laurie correctly points out, if the court order ascribes certain decision-making capacity for the parent plan coordinator, then the parent plan, otherwise everything the parent plan coordinator does is actually non-binding. So the parent plan coordinator can say, this is what I think should happen, but it is non-binding. And the High Court, as the upper guardian of all minors in the country, will never give away its own power. So any party can approach the High Court for relief if they don't agree with the parent plan coordinator. So parent plan coordination in this country at the moment is unformed. I don't do a lot of parent plan coordination because the responsibility is on me to assist the parents by making decisions, but the parents can just say, I'm not interested in what you say, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I've got no teeth, I can't do anything about it, you know what I mean? What I've sometimes done, which I suppose is a little bit impertinent, is I write to the judge's registrar who's made the order. And I let the attorneys know I'm not going to write to the judge's registrar and say this is what's happening in the matter. You know what I mean? So if it does go back to court, the judge is at least seized of, you know, that idea. I think in a few years, you know, we'll be forced, the courts will be forced to adapt legislation to organize parent plan coordination more effectively, to take the heat of certain decisions that a PC can make that the High Court needn't make. But that is a legislative issue which is ongoing, you know, at the moment, you know. And of course the third thing, you know, is voice of the child reports. Yeah, because that's becoming a more popular thing, and there's, you know, an increasing attempt at formulating what are the criteria to do a voice of the child evaluation. So the voice of the child evaluation is in the absence of talking to the family and the uncles and the aunts and the mothers and the fathers. You're meeting with a kid and you're getting a view of two major things. One is the child of an age and level of intelligence and psychological and emotional competence to express himself in a way that is credible? And two is, what does the child think about a situation? And I think voice of the child reports will also become increasingly important. I hope that answers your question.
I just wanted to say that Laurie mentioned the soft skills and mentioned that there's a need. Is a greater need amongst government officials more? I saw how Jackie was taking pictures of everything that you were, your slides over there. Because I know that there's a need amongst the frontline staff, the clerks at court, and all of these to have that soft skills that Laurie also referred to, that mediators should have, that should be also inculcated in the front line, whether it is the clerks, domestic violence clerk, the children's court clerk, the maintenance clerks, all of them needed, except for the maintenance officers that actually are dealing with those matters. And there's another group that is also left out of the picture, and that is public prosecutors. Public prosecutors have a course called social context study. Social context study, they're just being taught what is a biasness, what is to deal with high conflict and all of it, but it's all theoretical. There's no real substance to it in order for them to understand
So just over the holidays, I should design a psychological training for prosecutors, for frontline workers at the clerk's office, for Laurie's guys. I got my work cut out from here on. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.